If someone's watching this and the first thing they're thinking is, how can I help? What would you tell them?
You know what? That's probably about the hardest question that you could possibly ask, because you know what? There's lots of ways to help, but there's um, there needs to be some real push at all levels of government, whether that be municipally, provincially, or federally, to really start putting some real work and using spaces within all our cities that are not being utilized in any kind of real way to start to put people in beds, that otherwise would be sleeping in these tents in these parks, not just in Toronto, not just in Hamilton or Brantford and Niagara, but you know what, from coast to coast. This is an uh, absolutely a huge issue.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. How are you?
Hi, is this Miranda?
Yes, yeah. How are you, Lance?
I'm doing great. So Miranda, why don't you introduce yourself, let everyone know who you are and what you do.
Yeah, hi. My name is Miranda Black. I am an activist in Toronto. I'm currently working with a group called Solidarity Bloor Dufferin, looking at anti-development in the Bloor Dufferin area, and then also working with Skylar on this Land Back Unity concert coming up tomorrow, September 30th, for the Canada's first Truth and Reconciliation Day. So that would
Do
be
you,
me.
do you have socials you want to add as well? Like they can find you on Twitter at.
Nope.
Oh, all right. That's the first time that's ever
I'm a
happened.
little bit, yeah.
Awesome. Okay, well, why don't you start by telling me about this Unity concert?
So tomorrow we will be having a Land Back Unity concert. Skylar's been started with these just a little while ago, looking at um, land back in on Canadian soil, and working with folks who are from 1492 to create like these amazing concerts that are going on. One was in Hamilton a couple weeks ago. One's being held here in Toronto as of tomorrow.
I'm just trying to find a link for the event that I can share with everyone. Oh, I got one here from Jennifer Evans.
Cool.
So tomorrow night, join Landback Skylar and I for a discussion about solidarity with Bloor Dufferin, why it is underway, and our upcoming Unity TO concert. Can you explain the solidarity Bloor Dufferin?
Yeah, so currently there is a large development, was public land.
Mm-hmm.
It's now going into the hands of a development firm. It's called Hazelview Developments and Management, Property Management. They are looking at developing this into several high-rise stories of buildings and condos. And rather than doing that, we were hoping that we can organize and save this space.
Did they buy them directly from the city? Was that how they obtained public land?
They actually bought them from the TDSB.
Oh,
So
okay.
the TDSB has given up this property to a development firm. Essentially, this money should be going into taxpayers' dollars, but instead, the development firm only paid $2 million for a large piece of real estate where they will be having multiple condo developments and a few affordable housing units.
Wow. Is that typical in that area? Because I can
Yes.
say from like someone who's based in Vancouver, there's always like horror stories like that coming out.
Yeah, in Toronto, development is definitely an issue, especially with um, especially with high-rise condo buildings. You know, this idea of air real estate and taxpayers' dollars going to um, building more unaffordable housing rather than creating food security or food sovereignty in our communities. Definitely an issue.
Can you talk a little bit about the land back movement and specifically how it relates to this?
Yeah. My family is from Tyndall territory. I am Mohawk. I'm very proud of that. Most of my activism has to do with Indigenous resurgence in the city. Um, it also has to do with connecting with folks who are land defenders, like Skylar and friends who will be playing at our concerts.
What kind of music can everyone expect? Is it going to be a mix of like rock and roll, indigenous
Yeah,
music?
definitely. And actually, if Skylar can figure out how to use the
Oh, I see him popping in and out on the other side.
yeah, I could definitely introduce you to some of the musicians who will be there tomorrow.
Oh, he just left. All right, that's fine. Um, I've been trying to describe land back, especially as it relates to the Canadian scene, because I don't completely I can't really I don't have a lot of historical context for what the movement is doing in America. I've done a lot more research on the Canadian one, but when I try to describe it to people here, I usually relate to it about it's way less about the way it's framed in the media about they're trying to be like, you know, countries within countries, and more about it, the idea of honoring the original treaties that were signed between indigenous peoples and colonizers to this country. Is that kind of the messaging that you're putting forward, either in the concert or in your own activism?
Yeah, definitely. That's number one, actually. With this land back concert, we're looking at um, the reason why more cities are getting involved is to help with education for Indigenous youth who are urban, who may be missing some of their culture, along with supporting encampment residents and unaffordable, who are living through adverse situations due to unaffordable housing. Um, but yeah, upholding treaties is definitely number one. Skylar Williams, who was on the call, was
Yeah.
working with 1492 Landback Lane. They were fighting for original treaty rights in a very large portion of what's now known as Caledonia. It's just west of Hamilton.
Okay. Um,
So connecting with land defenders is definitely very interesting.
oh, and now we lost everyone. Hey, you there?
Hey,
Oh, it seems like everyone's reconnecting.
There we go.
Oh, Skylar, I can hear you
one
now.
here.
All right, let me resize
So
everyone.
we were just talking about original treaty rights, and land defense has to
Light
do with
conversation, eh?
yeah, yeah, and then we were also talking about how it is in urban space like Toronto. I was telling Lance more about treaty rights being um, essentially squandered in urban settings, but being really important to connect with more land defenders to get messages out about education to Indigenous youth, and then also about unaffordable housing and like supporting those who are facing adverse situations because of unaffordable housing.
Yeah, and also Skylar, do you want to introduce yourself to everybody?
Yeah, no, I'm Skyler Williams. Yeah, I've been the land back lane, 1492 land back lane spokesperson for the last year and a half, and I've been doing my part in trying to bring folks together for the Unity Jams, land back Unity Jams that we went to Hamilton there about a month ago, and have been participating in all of these concerts at Landback for the last over a year now, and so yeah, I've been quite happy to be play my small part in that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Um, can you explain to me a little bit about the housing crisis in Toronto? Because I think every major city probably has its own housing crisis, but usually they are kind of unique in their own way. I mean, I've been witnessing as the police have been kind of cracking down on the people's camping out in parks and stuff like that with an overwhelming amount of force. I'd say an overwhelmingly unnecessary amount of force. But could you describe it more for people who might not be familiar with it?
I mean, I lived in Toronto maybe 20 years ago as a young man, and This was something that we've seen on. Half of every person on the street was indigenous from somewhere, and as I moved back to Six Nations, and I guess I can't really tell the story of anybody else but my own, and so when I moved back to Six Nations, that guy, you kind of get divorced from the idea that this affects our nations at Six, and so when Trinity Bellwoods was going on, a friend of mine that had been at Landback Lane to support us called me and asked me if I'd come out and support the work that he was doing in Toronto. I went to Trinity Bellwoods, and a young man had come up to me and asked me if I was Skylar Williams, and I said, yeah. He says, yeah, you're that guy from Six Nations. And I said, yeah, I know, that's me. And he says, well, my family's from Six Nations. And he started telling me a story about his mother and how she went to residential school in Brantford. And when she moved out of the residential school at 16, she went to Mississauga, where she got married. She married an alcoholic, was an alcoholic herself. This young man that was talking to me ran away from home when he was 15 and had spent the last 30 years on the street. And so that really, really hit home for me about, what the trauma of residential school, the trauma of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and how impactful that has been on my community and in the nations there. And so it has been quite the thing for me to be able to help and participate in the way that I have with solidarity work with the folks that are living in these encampments, not just in Toronto, but Hamilton and other places as well, and Brantford, which is very close to the Six Nations, Niagara area. And so to try and do that work there, to try and make sure that these voices are being heard, because I think that more often than not, they're easy to walk by when you don't actually know a story, when there isn't a connection to you, to your home, to your family. And like this guy told me the last name of his family, and sure enough, that family name was a family that lived in my neighborhood of Six Nations. And so that very direct connection to me and my growing up around people that were very obviously his cousins and aunties and uncles. Like, these are the people that I grew up with. And so that part of that for me really drove it home that this is not just a Toronto problem or a Hamilton problem. It's a problem for all Indigenous communities, and that very direct line to land back, and that issue of land back being kind of front and center of that. Like, how is it that we are supposed to invite this young man home to his family and to his nation, to his community, so that he can have the supports that he needs, so that he can have a family that will lift him up? Like, how can we talk about any of those issues without being able to have land to be able to expand our borders? As every other big city and small town across the country continues to grow exponentially, the only ones that continue to get smaller and more hemmed in are reserves. And so we want to be able to say to those brothers and sisters that have been stolen from our communities, from our nations, we want to be able to say to them, like, come home. And so without that opportunity to do that, and do that in a real way, like, that's what that housing crisis, I guess, and that houselessness in Toronto means to me, anyways.
If someone's watching this and the first thing they're thinking is, how can I help? What would you tell them?
You know what? That's probably about the hardest question that you could possibly ask, because you know what? There's lots of ways to help, but there needs to be some real push at all levels of government, whether that be municipally, provincially, or federally, to really start putting some real work and using spaces within all our cities that are not being utilized in any kind of real way, to starting to put people in beds, that otherwise would be sleeping in these tents, in these parks, not just in Toronto, not just in Hamilton or Brantford and Niagara, but you know what, from coast to coast. This is an absolutely a huge issue that, people that have had to bear more trauma than any one person should ever have to bear is this is absolutely ridiculous that we are now jailing them, ticketing them, beating them, kicking them out of the one safe place that they've found in this, crazy cities that that people live in. Like, they've found a place that is safe, and and if that's where they want to call home, I'm going to have their back every chance I get. And so when this stuff happens, I'm going to show up every time, and I'm going to make sure that those bits of our families, those bits of our nations, that have been stolen away or pushed away from our communities because of this inability for us to be able to grow, is absolutely something that we need to make happen. Need to make it happen now.
Tomorrow being the day of truth and reconciliation, do you feel, since the discovery of the unmarked graves in Canada, that there has been a stronger push now towards non-Indigenous people maybe waking up to a lot of these issues, or at least for the first time realizing the severity of the situation?
Is that for me?
Either of you, yeah.
Yeah, I honestly do think that over the last 5 months, there's been a little bit more wake up, and over the last few years, there's been more solidarity in cities for things like land back. But the truth of the matter is, without the push from Indigenous communities this year, I don't think that we would be looking at a National Truth and Reconciliation Day. Whether this is like a platitude that's been granted by the government to Indigenous peoples, that's one thing, but the Ontario government has not seen this as a national or as a provincial holiday.
Oh, BC too.
Yeah, so that means
it's very performative.
Yeah, a lot of people don't think about how that affects Indigenous women, especially still needing to go to work during the day. For a woman to pull their children out of school for the day to be able to celebrate or to grieve is not something that a lot of women have the access to because of things like child welfare services. It's very difficult to pull your children out of school to be able to celebrate in a culturally significant way. But yeah. Skylar, what about you? What do you think?
You know what? I think naming a day Truth and Reconciliation Day, just for the sake of calling something, having, I've seen enough Justin Trudeau tears on enough podiums in front of enough altars dedicated to the kidnapped children, the murdered children, the raped and tortured children of our communities. I think that I've seen enough tears on enough podiums now to expect some action from this government, whether that be provincially, federally, or within municipalities. I think municipalities have enough control over their municipalities to make some real change, and certainly at the provincial and federal level, like these platitudes is exactly what they are. And I think naming a day Truth and Reconciliation Day is absolutely ridiculous and spits in the face of every Indigenous person across the country.
Did the two of you hear about the victory that happened today in the courts that Cindy Blackstock has been fighting for a long time? I was hoping you could explain a little bit to viewers about the problem in Canada related to children still being taken away from their families and placed into the foster care system, usually statistically under the terms, I think, is neglect, right, is the reason they usually say, but how that this is an ongoing problem that seems to continue to self-perpetuate itself, and also maybe discuss a little bit about the federal funding that should be coming from, I guess, the government to Canada in that case.
Yeah, that's a really loaded one. I think just last year, the government of Canada gave over $50 million to Indigenous communities. Firstly, a lot of that money comes from what was known as Indian Affairs um, to support Indigenous peoples, but the majority of that was given to the child welfare system. It just creates more of exactly what Cindy Blackstock is fighting. I think I'd like to leave it there because it's just such a loaded topic.
Yeah, fair enough. In terms of the two of your activism and working for obviously achieving housing, have you seen victories recently? Are there things that can bring people hope? As in, like in Vancouver, for example, there's a very strong push for modular housing and also co-op housing as well. I don't know if you've had similar things in Toronto.
In Toronto, we're lacking affordable housing. We're also dealing with, I had mentioned Hazelview Property Management at the beginning of the pandemic. This affordable housing management company actually kicked out, evicted quite a lot of their tenants because of a rent strike that was happening in the city. These types of things have actually led to increased homelessness. And so affordable housing, depending on the managers, isn't accessible to everyone. And along with that, getting folks off the street, there are definitely lineups and waiting lists that are quite long to be able to house people. And having culturally correct or sufficient housing is definitely something that's lacking for Indigenous people who are living on the street at this time.
I don't know if you can talk about this, but when we were reading articles on the encampments that were getting destroyed by police, they were trying to spin the story that they had already been offered alternative housing elsewhere. Now, I was able to debunk that in Vancouver. I have no idea about what's going on in Toronto, but in Vancouver, they were actually offered temporary housing, and then there was a lot of conditions that had to be met to be in that temporary housing. Like you had to be completely sober, you had to submit to these guidelines and stuff. So there was a large amount of people who were either, for a variety of reasons, they may be addicts or whatever, chose not to take that alternative. And so then they were spinning that narrative in Vancouver that people are refusing it. We're offering them housing, but they say no. So I don't know if it's similar in Toronto.
Yeah, actually, the situation in Toronto is a little bit different. For people from encampments to get housing, they actually need to go back into the shelter system. A lot of people were refusing to do so because of inadequate services that were offered by the shelter. During COVID, especially at the beginning, there were large tents being set up for encampment residents to live in. But these were like essentially shelters where beds weren't 6 meters apart and were lacking different types of resources. So for people to move back into that situation, if you have a community that you're relying on for your everyday needs, is definitely not fair. In the least. Skylar, do you know any more information about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you nodded off all of the stuff that I was going to say, but I mean, and I like the housing situation like on reserves is absolutely ridiculous. And so like for, entire families from, great grandma down to great grandchild is all living in one house with, between 10, 12, 15, 20 people living in a, three bedroom house like this is the situation that we're dealing with, right? And so when it comes to a housing issue, like this is something that has been an issue at every reserve, for ever. And so for us to be able to for folks like myself that live on reserve, like it is something that certainly hits near and dear to the hearts of all of us.
I don't want to obviously get into anything too personal, but could you discuss a little bit about that? Because often that's a question I get asked a lot. They're like, what is the situation with reserves in Canada? And I try to explain it from a historical standpoint, but I haven't been to one since I was 13, I think.
Well, I mean, like certainly why the issue around land back keeps coming up. Like Six Nations is the biggest by population reserve in the country by far, and you know what? A quarter of people that are living there don't have access to clean drinking water. Like they're a quarter of the people in our reserve cannot turn on the tap and drink the water from it. Like that in itself is an absolutely ridiculous sentiment to me. That this is where we're at in 2021. After all of these platitudes that you hear from uh, uh, Justin Trudeau, and how many tears we've had to see on podiums because of all of the poor Indians that he's supposed to be supporting and talking about for the last 5 years now, and how there's no greater relationship between Canada and except for the one with the Indigenous people of this country. And so for him to say that in as he was running for office and seeing Indigenous people come out in this big wave that we had come out to vote for him, and you know what, it is a disgusting thought that even the biggest, most populated reserve in the entire country, and a quarter of those people cannot take a drink from their tap without getting sick. Like, that's disgusting to me.
Yeah, that's horrifying. What can be? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to add here as well that something that a lot of people don't actually know, because it's such a bias against Indigenous peoples on this continent, is that probably about half of Six Nations works off the reserve and pay their taxes, and still those people aren't given water. They're not given.
It's far more than half. It's far more than half of us that live on that work off.
But I wanted to be humble about numbers, right? Because I didn't have them in front of me.
Yeah.
So a huge portion of this reserve of all of these folks, all these Haudenosaunee folks who live on one piece of land, aren't given water, even though they work in different areas. There's professors who work very hard for Western University, for other universities. There's folks working for the municipalities, and still, and then Canadians get really shy about talking about that they're living in an apartheid, and why, we're not comfortable talking about how Canada is an apartheid state. It's pretty heavy.
Yeah, absolutely. I going to that question about the water on the reserve. What could be done in order to solve that? Since it doesn't seem like, I know Justin Trudeau made that a campaign promise, and they love to brag about how he's already solved it in so many other reserves across the country. But like that's still deplorable that it's affecting that many people in 2021.
Well, last year, a northern community said that they needed $8 million to be able to put a pipeline and a water treatment plant in their community. It would cost $8 million to do that, so that everybody in that community would be able to turn their tap on and drink from that tap. Last year, at that same time, they spent $20 million policing 1492 Landback Lane. In policing alone, they spent $20 million in surveillance and on the ground, boots on the ground from the OPP to be able to police 20 people sat around the fire singing songs and laughing and eating. Like, it is an absolutely disgusting thought that money that was spent on overtime for police to be able to police us. And now we're talking about that in Wet'suwet'en, and we're talking about that in Fairy Creek. We're talking about that with the Mi'kmaq fisheries, that Kitigan Zibi Moose moratorium. Like, millions and millions and millions of dollars being spent on policing our people. Like this, the time for change is now. Like, the time for all the talk and the tears on podiums and the stuffed animal photo ops is like, I think and I think we can speak for most Indigenous communities to say, we're done with all of the photo ops. It's time to start making some real change and some real push towards something different.
Absolutely. Is there any Any stories of hope, do you think, that that have inspired you in relation to this? Because I know it is obviously a very it's a very heavy and dark subject, but you're going to be playing a concert, I believe, tomorrow, and I was curious if there was a note on that.
You know what? Seeing Fairy Creek come out with the win in their injunction not being extended for 1492 Landback Lane to have the win that we had this year. You know what? Like, all of these wins are incremental, but you know what? All of these fights are generational, and you know what? The only reason that we had even an argument to be had was because my parents, my grandparents, my great grandparents did everything that they could, dropped all the blood, sweat, and tears that they possibly could in order to, you know, be able to give my generation the argument to make the stand for the lands that we have.
Absolutely. Can I ask you just a little bit? I know you guys said you only had 30 minutes, but can I ask you a little bit about the concert itself? Like, if people are interested, where can they find it? How can they get to it? Do they need tickets? Does this fall under COVID rules? I don't know how that works in Toronto. If you have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually,
Oh, sorry. Please, Miranda.
I'm just getting so excited because we're actually having several schools, I think 7 schools, rally from their school to tell the Ontario government that it's a really important day for Indigenous peoples to show solidarity. I can see Skylar smirking over there. That's why I'm laughing a little bit, because there's a different view on the day itself. But I do really do believe that kids who are culturalists, through practices of assimilation and live in the city, can really like revive culture through coming to something like this and sharing it with their friends. And yeah, it's just really exciting. Um, yeah, and I also believe that it's a story of hope. So
That is very hopeful. I know this will probably bring things back down, but someone just said in chat, and I think you'd like it. I seem to remember Trudeau getting the figure of $4.5 billion to bring clean drinking water to all Indigenous communities, and 3 days later he bought a pipeline for 4.7. So that kind of shows you his priorities. Totally.
Yeah, it definitely does show his priorities. And also, although they've been, they do say that they've changed things for some communities, the amount of communities who are still dealing with boil water advisories seasonally that aren't listed on those lists are quite high. There's over, I think, 500 communities or something like that across the nation. I don't have the stats in front of me, so if I'm wrong, I'm wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Skylar, are you there? Your screen froze.
I think he's frozen.
Oh no. Well, okay. Why don't I do this then? If he's cutting out, for the final thing, what information do people need to know to find this, to find the event, how to listen to it? Are you going to stream it? Any of it? Would I be able to watch some of it online? Is there that as well?
At the moment, we may be streaming it through Facebook Live, 1492 Landback Lane, but I'm unsure about that. The best thing to do is come physically to Dufferin Grove Park, located at Dufferin and Bloor at 3 p.m. tomorrow for some amazing music. 7 Juno-nominated artists and Juno-winning artists will be playing. And again, kids' solidarity from different areas in the city.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for coming on, Miranda, and sharing your stories. It really means a lot.
Thank you.
And you're welcome on anytime if y'all have more things you want to promote or talk about.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Lance.
All right. Bye, Miranda. Bye, Skylar, if you can hear me. I don't know. Well, that was really cool. I didn't even know that was about to happen, but that was really inspiring. So yeah, I mean, hey, if y'all want free, amazing concerts that go towards supporting residential school survivors, land back, stuff like that. The Land Back Unity Concert presents Unity Jam Concert with Derek Miller, Logan Statz, Lila Black, Rob Lamoth, Howling Circus, Phil Davis, Pox, Kashasino, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Williams, Asanabe, and Jace Martin, and many more. That's September 30th, 2021, starting at 3 p.m. in Dufferin Grove Park. Sounds amazing. I don't live in Toronto, so I won't be able to attend. But hey, if you're in Toronto, that sounds like a swell all time. Hey, do you like movies? Do you like Serfs? Do you want movies and Serfs watching the movies? So then come over to the new channels. It's the Serfs, the cinema. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Can you do the thing, that thumbs up and comment and all those things that help us out in the algorithm that controls every aspect of our lives? Also, if you happen to have a Facebook account, can you delete it? Like just delete it. You should probably delete your Facebook account because it's not a great company. But hey, if you can't do that for whatever reason, I understand. And could you also go to facebook.com/thesurftimes then and give us a little like and a follow. We're just trying to push back against the fact that people like Ben Shapiro happen to dominate the platform entirely. And when everyone asks why do older generations believe the things they believe, one of the problems is the majority of them on social media use Facebook. So to counter that, we're just going to be on there too now. Also, if you happen to have a union or a worker co-op or even a leftist project, podcast, website, Zoom, MySpace, it doesn't matter. We will advertise it for free on this channel. All you got to do is go to weareserfs.com and use the forms that we got there, weareserfs.com. Thanks, everybody.
To our gods, Xander Corvus and Peyton L. Just, may you shower us mortals with gifts from the heaven. To our monarch, Tom Spiker, we are your humble jesters, clowning around for your amusement. To our lord, Trevor R. and Alexander Thaler, we give you our thanks for this meager land for us to toil our seed. To our knights of the Round Table, Egbard Sealine, Matthew Scarborough, Stellar Vision, Ariana McCarthy, Daniel Sutton, Ants Are Still Running the World, Coulter Smith, Tom Groh, Val 9000, Jenna Tal, Dark Puppy, Quiet One 85, Anna Loves Riley, Omni, Riley and Anna, Poodlehawk, The Tim Caucus, Multimondi, Trevor Janis, Lemmy 101, Anthropophojak, Saren 42, Chronic de Hemphog, Catherine, Radical Maniac, Ramon Acosta, Incosin, Violent Orchard, Sophie Baby, Political Puppy, Andreas Chiringuito, Zach Christensen, Josh Mickelson, Todd Buckingham, and Todd Lajeunesse. We raise our glasses and we salute you, our comrades.